Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Texans Probe. Today, of course, we're back with Drew, and today we got a special guest. Nico is on with us. Follow him on Elite Takes on TikTok, Twitter, everything. Well, I guess X. Still feel weird saying that, but thank you for joining us, Nico. We appreciate you coming on today. We're going to kind of discuss a special episode discussing Nick Caley, the new offensive coordinator hire for the Texans, replacing Bobby Slowick. Don't know how this could get any worse. That's kind of what we've talked about for the last week or so. Offense was very good this year. Me and Drew spent hours yelling at our computer this year watching the Texans offensive film. So I think no matter what, it'll get better. But obviously, it's fun to talk about something to kind of talk about as we get to this offseason, coming up with free agency and the draft. So, Nico, how you feeling today? You're a special guest, so what's going on?
Not a whole lot, we're just getting through this coaching cycle, a lot of ideas on the table and a lot of hires being made, and you're starting to kind of see what teams are going to look like next season based on the people that are in charge. So yeah, no, I'm it's a pretty cool time as we head into free agency.
Yeah, I mean, like Jacob said, it couldn't have gone worse. I mean, we all know how frustrating the Texans offense was to watch, especially me and Jacob. And, it was just so bad in terms of, sometimes the run game was off. The pass blocking was just an absolute nightmare the entire season. And so, frankly, it could not have gone worse. But Nick Caley actually brings in a lot of stuff we think that could hypothetically counter it. Like, for example, Sean McVay and the Rams. And to be fair, Caley was the passing game coordinator. Did a really good job throughout the season, I thought, of beating teams that like the blitz. As you saw, the Miami Vikings or the Minnesota Vikings, a team that blitzes all the time, they completely dominated. The Rams completely countered Brian Flores' blitz heavy scheme, and that's a super important thing to know. And we can even watch some of those clips of Rams offense and blitzes and stuff like that. But also, another thing I have to figure out, and we do not know, will be, the stunts. And maybe that's part of the offensive alignment on the team and not necessarily the coaching. That's something that we'll have to see, and I'm a little bit unsure of as well. But hopefully we get a creative offense. We get an offensive coordinator that's willing to adapt, which I think Nick Caley will do. There are great things being said about Nick Caley. He has worked so hard for this opportunity. He turned down other opportunities. From all accounts, he's very hardworking, and I would not be surprised if he's only here for 2 years. He probably only got a 3-year contract anyways to be the Texans offense coordinator. I think he's going to be a head coach at some point. I think he's really set up for success to be the Houston Texans offense coordinator.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting to talk about where, with Caley, compared to some of the other younger candidates, he stayed in with the Rams, got some offensive coordinator offers and decided to stay. So if you want to talk about, I know people were big on like Chip Kelly because he was not going to be a head coach. He could stay as the offensive coordinator for a while. Caley might be here for longer than you think, just because he's pretty picky about where he goes, and he's been that way.
Well, yeah, and I was thinking about that too. Like, he really is kind of similar to maybe Ben Johnson. Like, it really might be similar to that because he's picked out his things. And Ben Johnson, I'm sure, was a highly regarded person when he worked with the Miami Dolphins, and he just happened to be handed the keys to the Lions, offense after they fired Anthony Lynn midseason. And so something there could happen as well. And I think that, frankly, what Ben Johnson did will probably be taken into account by other young offensive minds just in the first place, because like Cliff Kingsbury, though he was already a head coach, they're going to try to take the best opportunities. Though, the other opportunities at other places are probably going to be taken by worse opportunities, like veteran head coaches. You see the Raiders, they got a bridge coach from Pete Carroll, things like that. So, you're right. Nick Caley could be here for a while, but also just the fact that, remember, he's a highly regarded offensive mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Caley, one of the cool things is that I remember last offseason, I know people have brought this up, CJ Stroud talked about how much of a fan he is of Matthew Stafford, and how much he kind of models his game after him, how much, and if he loves Matthew Stafford, I'm sure he would love to be in an offense that utilizes him in a similar way, because that's obviously a quarterback that he studies. And, the Rams have really let Stafford let it loose. It's not a very rigid scheme like the Shanahans of the world. They do ask him to make a lot of big gutsy throws. They do ask him to make a lot of adjustments at the line to beat the blitz, and they give him those sorts of answers. And it seems like CJ Stroud probably approved of this hire, considering there were also reports that he was going to be involved or consulted.
Right, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Miko about it. So I think that's definitely a very encouraging thing, as he kind of goes from just this quarterback getting started in the league to one who's kind of at the forefront of their franchise, dictating how their team operates.
Yeah, I mean, if you're CJ and you have a choice of the offensive coordinator, like you said, liking Stafford, I feel like it was probably Nick Caley and Gerard Johnson for his top choice for offensive coordinator. I really don't.
Now, that's exactly what I was going to say. They're both on staff now.
Right. And
so you kept Gerard Johnson around, who I think me and Nico talked about this, just throughout the weeks or just throughout the week. We like Gerard Johnson a lot. And his schematically what he does. I think, Drew, you've been on this too. The Texans fan base has been very negative towards Gerard Johnson.
For whatever reason, it blows my mind.
Yeah, they do not like Gerard Johnson. And I think I do kind of understand it, because whether it's fair or not, he's tied to what happened this season, and it sucks for him. But at the end of the day, he's got good scheme versatility. The quarterback, he's got good chemistry with him. There's a lot to like about Gerard Johnson. And like we talked about, if Nick Caley is this guy that, people talk him up to be, he's going to be a head coach at some point. And Gerard Johnson could easily be the guy that is the offensive coordinator next. I'm sure he got some type of raise or something to stay.
Yeah. And we can all agree that, or I hope we can all agree that, Gerard Johnson could also have been a reason why the season didn't completely fall off the rails. Being the quarterback coach. He watched the Titans game and the other Jaguars game and Ravens game where some of the mechanics looked off, and then both games against Kansas City, he was letting it rip. He looked confident. Absolutely. And his mechanics were good. So when a quarterback's mechanics are on to off and back to on, there's someone in his ear too. If there was no one in his ear, it would have fallen completely off the rails. And the person more so in his ear about his mechanics is probably Gerard Johnson, the former NFL quarterback, not Bobby Slowick, the guy who worked at PFF. I mean, it's just
Bobby.
Yeah. That is a very good point, because I remember, people just wanted to create these narratives throughout the season. It's like, oh, CJ's just not the same. He's rattled. He's going to need a whole offseason to retool. And then he'd just come back the next week and play a much better game. So it's not like the Jets game ruined him for the entire year. We saw him put up good performances after that, even though that was the climax of just miserable offense around him and how it was affecting him. So yeah, I mean, I do like Gerard the more I look into him, and specifically what's intriguing is his background with Kevin O'Connell, who was close with Sean McVay. So when you see the fact that he's staying on staff, it's not like you're just throwing a bunch of guys together that are going to have contrasting visions. Usually you want your offensive coordinator to bring in his guys, but it's pretty clear that they can be on the same page here. And he is constructive to CJ Stroud's success. I do believe that. He's one of the quarterback coaches in the league that I think we do see making a difference clearly.
Absolutely. And, we can talk about literally as we were about to start recording this, Cole Popovich got announced as offensive line coach. And what's funny is, you talk about the chemistry of bringing your own guys in. Obviously, that is a very real thing. They even talked about how D'Amico was going to let the offensive coordinator build his own staff. But Cole Popovich is another guy that has worked with Nick Caley before. They worked in New England together. New England historically has had good lines. They've run a lot of gap, which I think the Texans have to run more of. They're not a good zone team. They're much better in gap.
Yes.
And, Popovich is a guy that has the chemistry there. And that was something that I think Strasser struggled with as offensive line coach. He had never worked in a zone scheme, and they tried to make him the zone scheme offensive line coach. And you just saw it. Because even last year, me and Nico talked about this too. Last year, the line was actually, it exceeded expectations in the pass game. They were pretty good in pass protection.
It was
but they still could not run block.
Backups, so.
But they still couldn't run block last year, but they exceeded in pass protection. And the run blocking for 2 years has been brutal. And this year, Joe Mixon made it look a lot better than it was. He was super productive this season for them. But, having a guy that has played in a scheme that the offensive coordinator is going to try to run, is very huge. And, maybe you see a Rams, assistant offensive line coach, so you can kind of get both of the schemes that he would like to run. That would be super nice. But I think I want to say the Texans didn't have a run game coordinator last year, if I'm not wrong.
They did not.
I don't think Strasser had the run game coordinator title, which is kind of crazy because they were a bad running team last year and they didn't go get a run game coordinator coach. Yeah. Which is kind of wild. But now you get Cole Popovich as the run game coordinator, and I think that is a plus. And, they've talked about it where Joe Mixon loves Cole Popovich. There's your run game coordinator for your running back. I think Damian Pierce can excel in this type of offense as well as your second running back, and I think that's super exciting. I know Drew loves Damian Pierce, so I know he's excited. But I think there's a lot to like from the current staff that's being built with keeping guys like Gerard Johnson and Cole Popovich around, and then hopefully adding a couple of, Rams guys in the mix.
Yeah, I think that Popovich was just straight up going to be Caley's offensive line coach and maybe even run game coordinator wherever he went. Maybe probably Tampa Bay with the Jets, Patriots as well. Like he probably would have just been an offensive line. So this is Caley's guy. He just kind of happened to already be on the roster, and so fans are going to hate that. Oh my God, he's part of that offensive line that was just awful. And there's even people in some of our group chats that we're in just talking about, I really don't want it to be Popovich, or I really don't want it to be Gerard or whatever, because they were a part of the bad things. But I just don't understand like how they know for a fact that those coaches had an impact on what went wrong. While meanwhile, teams will go and interview Gerard Johnson. The Texans will say they really want to hold on to Cole Popovich. And he's highly regarded around the league. I don't understand like the disconnect. And I think that frankly, these are plus hirings. They just happen to already be on staff. So, and that's a major benefit because, we'll even hear things about how Joe Mixon loves Cole Popovich. CJ loves Gerard Johnson. Like it's just so good for the culture, plus having good football coaches.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, I lost my train of thought. But I would say it is interesting the fact that they didn't have a run game coordinator last year, and it almost just boils down to this idea that Slowick was sort of in over his head, and he's like the head coach of this offense. Like I think that's an important thing to embrace. The fact that DeMeco Ryans is letting this guy totally run their offense. So I like the idea that Caley is coming in, and not only he has a better personality to run an entire unit by himself. Like we've heard weird stuff about Slowick. He doesn't seem like the greatest leader of men, if you know what I'm getting at. But I think having more guys on staff and also just more guys with connected but also diverse ideas. Like we don't like Drew was just talking about, we don't totally know what was going on with Gerard Johnson and Popovich last year. They could have had different ideas and they were just getting overruled because they didn't have the most powerful positions, and now they're getting promotions. And I think all of that stuff is probably discussed in these interviews. So there's a lot we don't know. But I do think I have a lot more faith in the structure of how this staff is being built out.
Hey, Jacob, your guy, Jonathan M. Alexander, just tweeted, Cole Popovich.
I know, I'm quoting it right now, actually.
Well-liked and respected among the players within the O-line room, but wait, he had a particular focus on the run game under Strasser. So
I will say what I'm going to put in this tweet, and I think it's important to note. I think it's important to note that I think no matter what you did with this offensive line, zone blocking was not going to work. It just was flat out not going to work. They just don't have the players to do it. They were not mobile enough. Shaq Mason was, they would try to pull him and it would be a disaster. So they just flat out did not have the play. Titus Howard is not a good zone blocker either. He's much better in gap. So I think, and you see Popovich comes from a gap scheme in New England. I think Caley will bring more of the gap runs, which has actually become a staple for the Rams. Like I know people think of the zone run with the McVay and Shanahan offense. That's not really what the Rams do at all. The Rams have gone more to this gap scheme, and that fits the Texans much better. So I think the run game, I think it's naturally going to get better if they do more gap. You saw it in the playoffs. If they kept the exact same line in the playoffs and ran more gap, and it was actually pretty successful. They ran the ball well against Kansas City, who has a very good front. The Chargers game, they ran the ball. That drive at the end of that Chargers game was maybe one of the more impressive drives of the year. They just melt clocked. They were able to run the ball down their throat against one of the better defenses in the NFL. That type of stuff that you saw at the end of the season with more gap. And, even DJ Bieniemy had talked about, I think it was him, he talked about how players had been asking to run more gap all season.
Said that.
And Bobby Slowick would not do it. He refused to do it and then finally did it, and it was effective. So that type of stuff where I feel like Caley comes from a system where it's much more adaptive to what the teams have. And that is going to be what you see with the Texans. And that's why Popovich is staying, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, really, like you said, they do run a lot of gap. They're going to run a lot of duo. It's not going to be wide zone. And I think that, first of all, I would probably say that it was kind of personnel based. Like yeah, they had Cam Akers, who we've seen run, wide zone. It's pretty. He's a nice zone runner. But then they got Kyron Williams, and that the director of scouting is phenomenal. As I think Nico tweeted something out about, finally this guy's getting interviewed to be a GM. Like, geez, the Rams did a great job of scouting and using their personnel properly. And hopefully that's the one thing we see with Nick Caley, is that he just kind of utilizes the players' strengths well on offense. The scouting department's going to do what they need to do, but for the most part, the offensive core is already there. Hopefully Tank Dell can recover it's with some aspect, but you have Nico Collins there too. Tunsil's still going to be around, Mixon's going to be around, and just kind of work. And then I think that Dameon Pierce, like we said, can be a really good runner. If you watch the tape from the last game of the year against the Tennessee Titans, he is running hard, but also efficiently. He's using patience, vision. Like it's sweet. Like the Texans have playmakers on offense. We like Brevin Jordan too. Like. And I think that he
Nico's a Miami fan. He's not going to hide his Brevin Jordan love.
We're getting the band back together. Pierce is your guy. Brevin's my guy.
What's funny, great. I remember talking about Brevin with Nico when Slowick got hired. We were like, I don't know if he's going to stay. And then he turned out to be the best blocking tight end the Texans had.
Yeah, it was so odd. I'm glad it worked out that way.
No, yeah, and I think Brevin, he's going to be in for a big year. I'm watching the Rams last night. I watched the playoff game against Minnesota, and there's a lot of just like quick hitters to these tight ends. Davis Allen is making he was making key blocks at the point of attack, like on John Bernard, which the Texans tried to do in week 3. It was a total disaster.
And so that kind of smells trouble for some players in that tight end room. Dalton Schultz. And we'll see what happens with Cade Stover's development. But I think it's big trouble for Dalton Schultz. These guys can make all the jokes. Oh, Caley's the tight end coach. Dalton Schultz is our starter. He's getting paid. He's going to have a big year. He's just not. He's simply not the most talented tight end on the roster. And if you don't think that a tight end coach, one of the best tight end coaches in football, even apparently one guy told DJ Bieniemy, and Caley was one of the best. Like, he's gonna know which tight end in that room is the best. And I don't know how Dalton Schultz is really going to be utilized well in this offense. If he cannot block, he will not be on the field, and he simply won't be getting targets drawn up for him, because Caley is going to reward probably the one who works the hardest and is the most versatile. I think that's Brevin Jordan. It could be Irv Smith, and it could be someone that they draft.
Yeah, Irv Smith was the guy that when they signed him, I didn't expect much. But he really has turned into a good blocking tight end these last when he came into the league, he was just an athletic guy. That's who he was. He really was not a blocker. He's turned himself into a good blocker and a guy that I would be pretty happy if the Texans kept around, at least going into training camp, because that Chargers game and other games throughout the season, he made some really nice blocks at the key blocks for Joe Mixon to even the touchdown run on the 4th down to completely seal the game against the Chargers. He makes a huge block. Mixon goes 20-something yards for the touchdown. I mean, I think me and Drew were not the highest on Cade Stover.
Right, and you're going to say he improved. You're going to say he improved, but even then, it's still moments where it's you can't put a guy in that situation, and it kind of wrecks plays, and that's certainly not something that Nick Caley is going to want. He's going to want to put someone in there. I would certainly hope that he knows can get the job done.
Yep, and I think Brevin Jordan's the most reliable guy.
Right.
Just flat out think he is.
No.
Yeah. There's no doubt.
Hopefully he knows. I have faith that he knows ball.
That's the word on Nick Caley.
I like I said, going into that game, I knew who Dallas Allen was, but very little about him. And I'm watching him make plays. I mean, even that they threw a screen out to I think it was Puka, and it's not a very good throw by Stafford. Where if the Texans ran a screen and it was a bad throw by Stroud, they're losing 8 yards. Davis Allen is downfield just mauling people. Puka gets pushed for like 9 yards. I mean, it was like he made multiple key plays, and then he scored a touchdown on the same drive, which, I mean, the guy was wide open. It was more of a good adjustment by Stafford at the line, which is something else we could talk about because that was frustrating all of last year where C.J. Stroud could not make adjustments at the line, watching this protection just fold in front of our eyes, and he can't really do anything about it. So, much more freedom. And I think, like Nico brought up a good point earlier about how he loves Matthew Stafford. You go watch Matthew Stafford film, that's a big thing. He's very good at calling protections out. They did a very good job against, the defenses like the blitz a lot because, we talk about Minnesota. I would actually argue the Texans had the most trouble against Green Bay. That was a disaster.
That was so hard to watch. I think we said on the podcast we don't ever want to watch a game like that ever again in our lives. I think that's what we said.
That was probably the worst game of the season. And, the Rams handled it very well. They didn't have really any issues with it. I want to say, in the wild card game for the Minnesota game, I want to say their pressure rate was like a 15%, and the Texans and against Minnesota was like 45. On the Texans season, it was about 40. So you can it's pretty impressive what they did. And, bring up what we talked about Ben Johnson was brought up earlier, not that they have any real connections, but tight ends coaches for offensive coordinator are kind of becoming a thing.
Yes.
Because you have to know the pass game and you got to know the protection scheme. There's a lot that goes into it. Andy Reid played tight end, or coached tight ends. He did one of the two. I know. And then Sean Payton, Ben Johnson, Sean McVay, all these guys have been involved with tight ends at some point in their career. And it's pretty important because you get to understand the protections. And I really do think that was a big thing. We talked about Steinbeck as a candidate, which I know that was Drew's favorite guy. I'm pretty sure, Nico, that was your favorite guy too.
It was.
So, which I think just trying to fix the protection for the Texans is a big thing. And I think Caley will do that. I think he's much more qualified to do that than a guy like Gerard Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always an advantage when you can get a guy who has experience as a positional coach, but also in just like the overall strategy of the passing game as the passing game coordinator. Like that was, I hate to dog on him, but going back to Slowick's resume, like he never actually coached a position. Like he was just always in an office drawing stuff up for Shanahan. He was never out there really like on the field. And I think having that sort of blend, and also a guy who, even though he was the pass game coordinator, he was involved in the run game. Like that's important. Like that's a difference. And it's probably something that was an emphasis in terms of the replacement and what they would do differently this time around.
Absolutely. Bobby Slowick is a guy that, like you said, I think he's a smart guy. I do. I really do believe he's a very smart guy when it comes to stuff. But when it comes to the leader of men and getting the execution out of players, it's been talked about by multiple guys that there was just a lack of confidence in the offensive building with Bobby Slowick. And C.J. Stroud was a part of this. But Ian Rappaport even talked about the other day. The offensive line just didn't like him. That was a flat out. They had no confidence in Bobby Slowick, and I think Chris Strasser is involved in this too. I think they go hand in hand when it comes to the offensive line. But I thought it was interesting to hear the offensive line. They talk so highly about Cole Popovich, and they're like, Bobby Slowick and Chris Strasser have no idea what they're doing. That means something to me, at least, when you have guys like that.
Like the offensive line just like looked awful. Like we were making a joke about how I bet they're on Twitter looking at our tweets saying how awful they look, because like they just look
in Texans jerseys and stuff like that.
Like they genuinely look like it's just embarrassing, and they were probably embarrassed as well because they're NFL players. Remember, they're one of the highest paid offensive lines in the entire NFL. You got Titus's contract, Shaq Mason's contract, Tunsil's contract. Then you have a second round pick on there with Scruggs. And Kenyon Green. at one point in time was on there too.
Oh,
First round
jeez.
pick. But no, so look, you put a lot of assets into the offensive line. They're all talented players, highly touted players, and they just looked awful. And remember, there were backups in last year that did not look awful. And so all of that combined is just very embarrassing. And they know they can do better. And maybe they're right. They just genuinely thought that the staff was not putting them in the right spots.
Yeah, no, it is pretty crazy to think how much they've invested in it. And, there are guys like Kenyon Green who knows if they were going to work out anyway. But we've seen a lot of good play from plenty of guys on this line, and have to imagine, there's a lot of opportunity to get new talent in there as well. So it rock bottom, and there's only upward mobility from here, truly. Like there's no way it gets
really can't, yeah.
There's no way it gets worse, and there's a lot of reason to believe it will get better.
Yeah, and I have confidence to believe they're not going to keep the same offensive line group, but I do think if you kept the same offensive line group and went into next year, it probably would get better just off of Caley and Popovich and these guys, because I really I'm watching the Rams, like I said yesterday. I have a hard time believing that you could convince me the Texans' offensive line isn't more talented, if just a player-by-player standpoint. I would have a very hard time believing that, because you get a guy like Laramie Tunsil, who is a lockdown tackle. I still think Titus Howard is a very good right tackle. I like Juice Scruggs. I like Jarrett Patterson. I liked Shaq Mason coming into the year. Not anymore. I think he's going to get cut. But there is talent on the offensive line. It's not like this is a position group that they've invested a ton in and there's just very little signs of life. There are good players on this offensive line, and I think PFF, one of the good things that they do is trenches. I think they do a good job of that. And there's a lot of players on the line that actually grade out well. And you're like, how the hell is that possible when you watch the product on the football field? But, really for a lot of the year, it was straight up just Kenyon Green being in the 30s. It was Kenyon Green being legit the worst guard in football. And then, like Juice Scruggs had some good games at center. I know, Drew, you think of him more as a guard. I still think of him more as a center. I think it's more
of a guard based on he just handled everything much better when he was playing guard. Frankly, when he was playing center, and Patterson handles things better when he plays center versus guard. And then also the only person who has no excuse from staff, I would say Shaq Mason. Like you said, he's got to be cut. His performance also was one-on-one based a lot, and he just simply
he just got beat.
Right?
Honestly,
Kenyon Green, we talked about head ducking, and that's the thing that came up the most was those two.
Yeah. The most frustrating thing to me with Shaq Mason with the staff is that, I thought there was just not a very good player, but I also thought there was a lot of we're asking Shaq Mason to pull across the line, and he has proven year in and year out at this point. He's 33, whatever he is. He's proven the last 3 years on film. He can't pull. He just can't do it. He's not fast enough. He didn't have the foot speed. He looks lost trying to do it, and they would continuously ask him to do it. The one that stands out to me is the Tennessee game where we ran a fake jet sweep to Mixon, and he's in Mason's supposed to pull. It's not even close. He did not get close to making any contact. It was a free rusher. So stuff like that is frustrating. But and there was a lot of stuff like that I think. Chris Rosser and the offensive line room, that's not really their fault. That's just straight up bad scheming by Bobby Slowick. And Chris Rosser's out of a job for a reason. They talked about how he wanted to retire last offseason. He should have just retired because that was a disaster. He should have just retired. And he would have gone on a high note because the offensive line was better than you would have expected last year. So, and that's why I kind of think going in staff is not the worst decision, because if you get the pass protection you got last year with, better players, people would be thrilled because they would be one of the better pass protection groups in the league with how they played it 2 seasons ago. There was bad schematics. There was bad route combos. There was just a whole heap of bad offense. You watch the red zone offense, and that was just absolutely awful to watch. You watch the Kansas City game and we're rolling out and 2 guys are out of bounds. I just have no idea. The spacing was just bad all season. You talk about the Tank Dell injury. Why are the 2 guys are in the same spot? Happened a lot, which is concerning. Never should be something that happens consistently for an offense. The Baltimore game was another one where there's 2 guys. What's funny is, one of the guys that I respect that does a lot of content, like Theo Ash, he did multiple videos on Bobby Slowick, killing Bobby Slowick, which I thought was very funny. I respect his content a lot, and he killed him multiple times. He was not big on Slowick coming into the year, but boy, he was critical of Slowick at the end of this year. And I'm gonna take this hat off. It keeps cutting out with the green screen, or the background. But
Jacob.
But no, Theo. The Baltimore game, there was multiple plays where either guys are running into each other, they're occupying the same space, just stuff that just shouldn't happen in an NFL offense.
That too. The red zone design was frankly stale. Third down play calls were skeptical. It was just so much that was hard to watch. I really thought that maybe one of you guys could have ran the offense, and it might just be a little bit better.
Hey, Nick Caley apparently was putting his offense on, college football and on the PS2. So, I took my team UCF to the national championship in my last college dynasty. So hey, at least I can relate more with Nick Caley here. He's more a relatable guy than working at PFF. Even though I do have the PFF thing going with the fan base. They do call me the PFF guy. So maybe I relate more with Slowick.
It's a little embarrassing based on who the previous offensive coordinator worked for.
Bobby Slowick,
I know, which is funny because now I post PFF stuff and everyone's gonna ridicule me for it because you remember we had a PFF guy working for us. They don't know what they're talking about.
Come on, man.
So. But no, I think and we can talk about this too. There's other candidates. I know Nico, you tweeted about it and we talked about it. Caley was not your favorite candidate. I know most people in the fan base thought Chip Kelly was the best candidate. And I actually, I had seen stuff recently where it is possible he interviewed with the Texans, just was not talked about. And
it is. You spotted in Houston. I mean, and people are like, oh, he's on this recruiting trip. But then, literally within 24 hours, his offensive line coach that's worked for him forever takes the job with the Cardinals. And I think there was clearly some sort of plotting behind the scenes that Chip
John Alexander and, others made it. I've talked about it, Drew knows this. I have a lot of respect for John Alexander. I think he is the best Texans reporter. Like he seems to nail it a lot of the time. And he talked about it even on Friday, the day or 2 days before. I think he was hired on Sunday. So 2 days before, he straight up said, if they want Chip Kelly, they can get Chip Kelly. It's just the Texans don't really want Chip Kelly. That was the reality of the situation, is that they were not that interested in Chip Kelly. Cal McNair is not a guy who's shortage on money. I know the Raiders spent a lot to go get Chip Kelly. I don't think money was an issue. Cal McNair has always opened up the checkbook. Even when the Texans were really bad, he opened up the checkbook on guys like David Kelly and Lovie Smith, who were not highly regarded head coaches, but they got paid a lot of money to be the head coach.
Yeah, okay. He might not have one of the higher paid head coaches because D'Amico doesn't get paid $6 million, but he still would have gotten a good amount of money.
At least in my opinion, I think he would have taken 4 to be a Texans offensive coordinator, over 6 to be the Raiders offensive coordinator.
I think he just kind of happened to offer 6. They probably just said, you can have this money.
Yeah, I think he honestly, what he probably did, he probably was like, if you don't offer me an insane amount of money, I'll just stay at Ohio State. I got no reason to leave. So he probably just was straight up like, I'm not leaving. Because the Raiders are like, we can be honest with the Raiders. They're not a great situation. I think they have a good future. I like some players like Brock Bowers. Love Brock Bowers, obviously. I think Jacoby Myers is a good player. But, they don't have a quarterback. Pete Carroll's not there long term. I like Patrick Graham as a defensive coordinator. I think they have defensive talent. I like Tyree Wilson. I liked him coming out of the draft.
Oh, man.
I still push for Tyree Wilson, and he was actually pretty good this year. He not talked about, but he was solid this year for them. And Max Crosby is obviously a great player.
We're gonna win the Tyree Wilson war. Stay strong.
We're gonna do it. We're gonna do it. Tyree Wilson's gonna be the guy. I've kind of given up on my Quentin Johnston agenda, unfortunately. I think that one we just gotta flush it. But Tyree Wilson was a guy that I loved coming out. I always thought he was kind of a raw player. He just was a physical freak. That's what he was at Tech. And you're kind of seeing the development now, because I think Patrick Graham is a very good defensive coach, and I'm glad they kept him around. Pete Carroll is not there long term, but they do have two good coordinators, in place now. I think.
Yeah, I mean, that'll be interesting because I thought that they were going to get a bunch of young coaches and just try to have like Pete Carroll facilitate this rebuild. But now they're bringing in all these hot shots, and it's like, man, do they have like a big plan at quarterback this year? Like, are they? I don't know. I mean,
I didn't know what it would be.
I was very convinced until Chip that they were just going to hire Bevel and get Russell Wilson. I really thought that seemed like the plan, right? Like that seemed like the plan for them. I thought that was going to happen. I mean, with Chip Kelly, like maybe Justin Fields is an interesting target. Like get the mobile quarterback. You know, he's a free agent. I don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah, no,
they're a very interesting team coming into free agency. Because like you said, I thought when they missed on Ben Johnson, I really thought the next target was just Liam Cohen. I thought that made the most sense. I thought Brady would have, Brady still has connections in Tampa. You would think they would speak highly of him. You would assume, and Liam Cohen clearly goes where the money is. He's not going to.
That's a weird situation. That is one where I love what Cohen did schematically, but it's if you're reading between the lines, like clearly there's something not great about him.
He's a very interesting, because there's something up, like we talk about the leader of men, and it matters as offensive coordinator. It matters way more as a head coach. And Jacksonville has had culture issues. That is something, because I think Doug Peterson schematically is a very good head coach. I will stand on that. I think he's a very good offensive coach, but the culture, and Press Taylor was obviously part of this, but the culture in Jacksonville was just bad. If Liam Cohen's not a guy that I think is going to step in and fix that. He's left at every turn. He hasn't stayed in a team. I think in like 5 years he was like Kentucky, and then he went to the Rams, and he went back, and then he went to Tampa. Just a very interesting guy, but very good schematic coach for sure. But back to the Texans. We got a little sidetracked here. Back to the Texans. Fun conversation when we talk about the head coaching search. But I'm glad that we can talk about some other candidates. Steinvik, I know, is a lot of people liked as well.
But to be fair, like my thing about Steinvik was also the unique run scheme. Like it was versatile, it was modernized, it was creative. But I also think that frankly, Caley can create that too. He was probably the guy right below Steinvik that would actually create a creative run scheme. Like you see really cool things in Los Angeles, motion after the snap, or right before the snap, or whatever you want to call it. Not just the shifts from slow. So things like that. They're gonna run like insert duo, which a lot of people don't really know what that is. Like they might bring a receiver in or a tight end. They're gonna have the lineman here, and that tight end's gonna go in right there, and they're kind of gonna have like a little fold action as well. Like they're gonna run gap too. They're not really gonna run too much wide zone, but of course, Mixon is good zone runner, in my opinion, with the way he kind of moves differently than others. So they can really do whatever they want, and utilize Dameon Pierce to utilize another guy from the draft if they want. So they can get creative in the run game. They will need some blocking receivers as well. Robert Woods could be here for another year to do that. Xavier Hutchinson could be here to do that. But they also could draft someone.
Hey, good transition point here. I know Drew is not a fan of this, but we gotta talk about it because
you got me.
Stepped into that one. He stepped into that one. But I know it's been talked about a lot. Cooper Kupp to Houston has been talked about a ton these last couple of days, and I know Drew's not a fan. But I will say this is my take on it. I tweeted about this. This is just how I feel. I still think he's a productive receiver. He's definitely taking a step back. He's not going to be this 2021 version of himself, but he still is a productive receiver in this kind of big slot role that the Rams like, that Caley could kind of bring over. And if the Rams will take on money, I'm cool with sending a day 3 pick. That is what I would say. I'm not paying $20 million for him. They would have to pay probably like my what I said was probably 50% of the money. I'll send you a fifth. That was probably what I would think is a realistic.
Right. If it's a third or fourth round pick, I'm losing my mind. Frankly, I'm losing my mind. Yeah. You have the opportunity to sign Diggs. You have the opportunity to draft a receiver, and that's what you do. I couldn't get behind that whatsoever.
I don't see it being anything more than a fifth, honestly.
Yeah, no. I've seen people say sevenths or just flat out cut, and I mean,
he might get cut.
Cut is a realistic thing too.
Might get cut.
But I mean,
and
go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh no, you're good. Go ahead, Nico.
Okay. I mean, I was just gonna say, I feel like Cup has, I mean, in terms of like getting your scheme guy or just a guy that fits well with CJ Stroud, I think, you know, you have Diggs and Dell, and those guys have been part of the plans. But I think he sort of emerges as he can be one of those three guys for them moving forward, and maybe one of those other two is not in their plans as much, just because of the fit. And I mean, Diggs would probably be the guy that, because of age, might leave their plans. I mean, I know that's another situation that they've kind of committed to, I guess, in terms of telling him that he's going to be around. I don't know totally what's going on there, but I do really like the idea of Cup, and I think specifically with his blocking ability, with his knowledge of the offense, you know, he can develop some chemistry with Stroud. You know, Stroud loves those underneath timing throws. I think he'd be a very, very nice asset to raise the floor of the offense, raise the floor of the passing game.
If we're going to talk cap space, though, and like really think this out, that means you probably can't spend money on a safety, which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. You can't really.
Eric Murray's back. We won, Drew.
Who?
Eric Murray's coming back.
Eric Murray's coming back. Yeah,
we're bringing Eric Murray back. That's our guy.
And then you can't really spend money on offensive line. You have to draft and hit on offensive line in that case. So it's just a little. I'm not saying I've looked into, like, you know, the interior offensive line class and saying they need to sign this guy, but they need to have some flexibility in terms of that. I just feel like you kind of get rid of some. Don't we think that Cup, you know, from a cap standpoint, would be a little expensive, or is also they would have to make another way for maybe to be like a backloaded contract or to be a signing bonus or something to free up cap space in terms of this offseason, because I think they want to at least be able to address some of the things that went wrong. Because like we said, Jacob, in the past, like now we know what the holes are. So now that we know what the holes are, let's go fix that. Let's not wait another year. Let's just go do that now. And then in the future, that's when we'll go back to trading for, you know, your stars, your disgruntled stars, or your guys like Cooper Kupp or Diggs. And that's when you'll go and make those moves. But I think right now they just need to focus on addressing the needs. But of course, if they find a, you know, contractual way around it to where they free up cap space, they don't spend much draft capital, by all means go for it, because that's not really even a risk, frankly.
No.
Yeah.
You know, I can pull up if you want to talk contract wise, I can pull up Texans Cap did a thread on the possibility
I saw
for Cooper Kupp, and you know, he actually the way he talks about it, he makes it seem like it's definitely plausible. So like talk about, so this is kind of what Drew, you were talking about. They could always pre-negotiate a contract and then open up cap space.
Yeah, that's the worry here.
So, you know, it's definitely a possibility. There's no way the Rams are getting off the contract. They're going to have to take money. Ian Rappaport even talked about them being willing to take money today, which, you know, a lot of times is not necessarily reported to the public, but when in this case it is. So, you know, it's out there. The Rams don't have a lot of leverage in the situation. The pick, like I said, it's a possibility he just flat out gets cut.
It's such a weird situation.
That would be a great win. That would be home run, because you just get to work out a completely new deal, and it's just an ideal situation. I mean, we talked about how Caley was wanting the ideal situation. I'm sure that they could have similar kinds of conversations with Kupp to get a more team-friendly deal. So, I mean, he just wants to keep playing, and I assume that he would love to go to a similar system with another good quarterback. So, I mean,
I mean, really, the only other scenario is like a somewhat winning team. You know, he probably won't actually go to the Patriots. I know people are going to talk about that as possible, but I don't really see that. Maybe, and the other one would really just be the Falcons of Zach Robinson. That's really the only one I could think of that, and maybe the Chargers if they have space. But I can't really see him going to many places.
Yeah, I think the Falcons outside of the Texans make the most sense. You get the Zach Robinson offense. Who I love, by the way. I've talked about this. I love Zach Robinson as an offense quarterback. I was shocked he did not get as much head coaching love as I thought he was going to, because their offense was very good on paper. Especially when Penix took over, their offense was insanely good.
It was.
Next year he's obviously going to get. And hey, look, he makes up for PFF Bobby. You get PFF Zach, and he's much better. So
he's kind of doing some of the same stuff. You know, he's spamming wide zone with Bijan, but that works. He's catering to his personnel.
Yeah, he's probably just doing it because he has Bijan.
Yeah, I mean I would spam wide zone with him all day.
Yeah, no, I know a Falcons fan on Twitter that I talked to a little bit, and he was mad last year they didn't spam Bijan wide zone more. So I'm sure they're pretty happy about it.
No,
not too upset about that. But no, like we talked about, the McVay offense, it caters to what you do well as an offense. McVay has done this very well with Kyren, a lot of duo, a lot of gap, which I think the Texans are just better at. You saw it late in the season, and that's something that, I think their Texans are going to bring over. That, I mean, even in New England, when he was in New England, and they were a gap team. Like, they ran a ton of gap. And then we talk about Popovich was also there. So Popovich is going to know the gap scheme, be able to help with that. And like we talked about, the line is not untalented. If you want to go back to 2022, where the Texans, they just drafted Dameon Pierce. They ran the ball well that season. It was more gap. It was kind of 50-50 zone gap that year. But the offensive line was, pretty decent that year. They couldn't throw the ball because they had Davis Mills, and the receiver one was like Chris Moore. So that didn't go well. But outside of that, they actually ran the ball pretty effectively. Dameon Pierce had a really good first season.
Sure did.
And I think you can see more of that this season with a more talented line and, in my opinion, a more talented running back, where I think Dameon Pierce is a good back, but Joe Mixon is a very, very talented running back. There's not a lot of backs that I think have better vision, better foot speed than Joe Mixon. While he doesn't have the breakaway speed,
he operates very well close to the line of scrimmage, more than most, and he's got this massive, juke move, kind of gallops like a horse, like we've talked about it too. It's a very unique running style, and you're probably not going to find anyone like that. And I'm still waiting to scout someone that runs like Joe Mixon, because it hasn't happened yet.
We always talk about how when he gets in the open space, he almost gallops. It's a very weird running style. So, it's like I've never seen anyone run like that before, but it works. He was super effective. I actually talked about this the other day. I was critical of the Joe Mixon move. I did not like it when it happened. It worked out. It worked out. So credit.
I was wrong too.
Oh.
I guess this whole offseason taught me to not doubt these veteran running backs that hit the market, because I was wrong about all three of them. I thought Josh Jacobs was not good, even though I still am a little bit hesitant on Josh Jacobs as a player. I thought he was pretty good this year.
Not in the worst way too, Jacob, because the running scheme and the production wasn't even good. But you're like, damn, Mixon is actually a really good player. So you got it in the absolute worst way, man.
Yeah. Well, but I will say, at least, because some people would straight up be like 4.2 yards a carry. He sucks. But in credit, I did watch. I watched the games.
I hate when people analyze running back play that way. It's the most ridiculous thing.
Yeah, no. And what's funny is there's a lot of people in the Texans fan base, not necessarily running back wise, but other players will do that. Where I remember Stingley was talking about, because he didn't have the production at the corner spot.
Well, PFF railed him.
They're like, Sauce has 5-6 and Stingley has 1. This guy's a bust. Yeah. And then now it's completely flipped, right? So it's just. And then I remember Will Anderson was the same way. People were all over that when he had 1 sack in the first 8 weeks of his career. And he had all these pressures.
We have conversations. It's always stupid stuff.
Yeah. No, there's always stuff like that. But like I said, I admitted very early on that I was wrong about Joe Mixon. Literally week 1, I was like, yeah, I was wrong about this guy.
Week 1 was one heck of a game.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was the best the offense looked all season.
And yet Stroud was still already running for his life.
Yeah. I guess Buffalo, the first half against Buffalo was probably the best they looked. But but that was the thing too, is this season. That's why, Gerard, I was higher on Gerard than a lot of people, because offensively there were still things the Texans did well offensively. It wasn't like it was all bad. It was a lot of bad, but there was good things the passing game did. Attacking the middle of the field to Nico is just an automatic, it works every time, it feels like. And Sloak did a good job of that. I will give him credit with the second window stuff. Sloak was good at that. Like I said, Sloak was not a bad play designer for the most part. There were some bad play designs, but I think he was a good play designer, that he got to the point where he kind of ran out of designs and then just started reusing them, which was a big issue. He reused a lot of play designs. But he's a smart guy that just didn't understand changing personnel. And that's something that Shanahan, I talked about it in the group chat earlier today with Drew, and we were talking about this. Shanahan's a guy that he doesn't really adapt to what he doesn't have to adapt to what his team does because they have guys like Kittle and Juice who can go and block these guys. Like they can block these edge rushers that the Texans could not do. They can go with the 12 personnel. They can do all this because they have the personnel to do it. The Texans didn't have that, and Slowick tried to do the same thing, and it just did not work. Like you can't expect Cade Stover to beat George Kittle. It just was never going to happen.
It's unfortunate, and I think that's kind of the lesson we're learning with Shanahan schemes across the league is that you need the most versatile guys imaginable really to run that scheme. It's not as much of an elevator of talent as people make it out to be, in my opinion. So I have soured on it a little bit.
No, it's definitely it's one of those offenses where I think Shanahan runs it so well because of the talent that he has. He has the exact guys that you have to run the offense. And credit to him. Credit to Shanahan. Like he is a very brilliant offensive mind. I don't think anyone will take that away from him. But to run the offense he wants to run, you have to have the guys to do it, and he just has those guys, and they've developed the guys well. And that really is a big thing. They developed a lot of these guys into the guys that they are. But when Bobby Slowick, and honestly, I think what kind of sucks for Bobby Slowick is I think if he came here thinking it was a rebuild, and then it sped up very quick on him. They didn't have time to develop kind of the guys that he wanted to have in these situations, and then it's this year we came in expecting Super Bowl contention, and the offense was terrible. So he's just immediately got he was out of a job. Yeah. It's just the reality of it. If maybe if it was a rebuild, they would have taken it a little bit slower with him. But I think Stroud was so good immediately, which again, credits to Gerard Johnson. Stroud was so good immediately. They did a good things protection-wise. Nico Collins took such a big step immediately that it just sped up on him very quick. You don't have time to develop guys like Cade Stover. You don't have time to throw Cade Stover into this role of being George Kittle or Kyle Juszczyk that he can't do and expect that to work like long term because you don't have time for that.
Yeah, and that's fair. I was literally thinking so why did they even sign Dalton Schultz in the first place? I hate to dog on him, but if this is really Bobby Slowick's philosophy and he wanted to do it the Shanahan way, why would they even sign off on signing Dalton Schultz originally the first time, which I guess wasn't even a bad deal. I think it was probably like $8 million or something like that. And then the re-signing
Yeah. And honestly, Dalton Schultz was pretty good 2023. He had a pretty good year. Like I did think he improved blocking wise that season. Maybe because he's on a contract. Like that might have been the reality of it. He just tried a little bit harder because he had to work for a contract.
I hate that's not even like a thing, but like it's
a reality with Dalton Schultz. That is a reality with him.
Yeah.
But there's just a lot of laziness when you turn on his film. It's not necessarily that I think he's the worst blocking tight end ever, which I think some people think he is. I really don't think he is that. I think he can be a decent blocker, but it's just an effort thing. And maybe that's where Caley steps in and is straight up like, we will cut your ass. If you don't try and block, we're not going to play you. We don't care about the money. We just won't play you. Like I told you the other day, it might get to the point where you just are straight up like, I will give you a 6th rounder or a 5th rounder to just take on the contract. We'll take on 25% of the contract to do it. Like that might get to where it is if Caley comes in and it just doesn't work. But I don't think Dalton Schultz sticks. I don't think he does. I think maybe one more year, and I think that's it.
Yeah, ultimately what I'm looking forward to for the next 2 years is to see how different the roster, the offensive personnel looks. From how it looked, in CJ Stroud's rookie year into this, frustrating year that we just had. I want to see what they actually did, or was it really just, or was it Slowick? Was it Strasser? I think that's kind of maybe the fun thing to look at for us. Because remember, the Texans made the playoffs both of these years. We're not talking about a team that went, 4-13, 5-12, all that. This is a playoff team both years, and it was frustrating in many aspects both times. So it'll be interesting to see how they adapted away from it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And, it's like they won a playoff game this year and were very competitive in a divisional game against a team who's in the Super Bowl and probably going to win it, in my opinion, right? Like, that's the reality of the team. Like their offense was held them back this year from being a legitimate contender. Like that is how good the defense was. And I think that's why you see Nick Caley. He was clearly waiting for the right opportunity. And you see this opportunity with D'Amico Ryans as your head coach. You get CJ Stroud at quarterback. You get Nico Collins. You get Joe Mixon. You get a talented offensive line. Whether it played well or not, it's a talented line. You get to keep a guy like Gerard Johnson on staff, which I really do think helps. You just straight up were like, Stroud, I don't have to worry about you that much. You can, like, Gerard can tell me what you want to do, pretty much. Like, that is the reality of how close Gerard and Stroud are. Yeah. And I think Gerard's a very smart guy. Like Nico brought up earlier, it's nice to have him work in a KOC offense. And there's differences between KOC and McVay, but it's a lot of similar, verbiage or a lot of similar concepts. And they're both very good offenses. KOC is a brilliant offensive mind. I don't think anyone will tell you differently. McVay is the same way. So it's super nice to have him back, and hopefully Cole Popovich, hopefully he is a very good offensive line coach. I did see he just DM'd me again after he got announced the job. So I guess wow.
Wow.
No, but like I really do think he can be a very good offensive line coach for this team. He's very well liked, like they've talked about. And I think the gap, no matter what, the gap scheme will help. And, it's not like this offensive line group under Slowick was bad both years. They were pretty good the first year, like we've talked about. They exceeded expectations with who they had playing. Michael Dieter was starting at center, who I thought was brutal. He was not very good, but they made it work. George Fant, who I was a big George Fant fan when he was here, right tackle. But Titus Howard's a better player. And they have a guy like Blake Fisher, too, who's a talented player. Maybe he can step in here. There's plenty of options in free agency. I know Drew said he hadn't really seen the free agent class. I like the free agent interior class. Trey Smith is obviously the very top guy, which I don't think is a realistic target. I don't think that's going to happen. But you get guys like Tevin Jenkins, who I like. I know Ryan. What's the Colts center? Ryan Kelly, I think is. Am I got the right guy? Yeah, he's a free agent.
Yeah.
I like James Daniels from Pittsburgh. He's a guy that could be cheap too because he missed a lot of this year. But he's been a pretty productive player for a while. Will Hernandez is another guy who missed a lot of this season that could step in and be a guy who just kind of plays a role. They don't have to get 5 superstars on the offensive line. You just got to get guys that are solid.
Absolutely. I mean, that's kind of you're only as good as your worst player on the offensive line. That's kind of a truth of it. So if they can just throw a couple stop gaps in there, they're going to be fine because they have so much to make up for it outside of that.
Absolutely. I mean, there's certain guys just got attacked. Like that was Kenyon Green. The first half of the season got attacked, and then the second half of the season, second half of the season, you straight up got Shaq Mason got attacked. Like that was the reality of it. These guards got attacked all season. The tackles were fine for most of the year. Titus Howard was pretty good, and then Blake Fisher came in and played pretty well. And honestly, Titus Howard moved to guard, and I was not a big fan of the move because he had been bad at guard the last couple of years. He was pretty good at guard. Like he stepped in and played well, and the line got better. I know the Kansas City game, there was 8 sacks, but 5 of them were in the fourth quarter. There was definitely protection issues, but a lot of it was not the line too. There was a lot of like Dalton Schultz whipping. So, I think there is something to build on from the offensive line, whether it was very disappointing season, but you can't roll a guy like Kenyon Green out there again. Kenyon Green's probably not on this football team next year. If you want to know the reality of the situation, I don't think he either gets cut or he's like a conditional 7th guy. There is no way he's sticking on the roster. I don't think. And they talked about trading him at the deadline, but I was like, who the hell wants Kenyon Green? I don't know who would have traded
the Giants, and I almost fell to my knees. Like,
there you go, Kenyon Green and Evan Neal, man. That's a dominant left side.
Oh my gosh! Oh my god! Biggest bust in the last 3 years.
We're getting a little bit off track here again, but I cannot believe Evan Neal is a bad player. I thought coming out of Bama, he was a safe pick. I really did. And he is awful. I cannot believe it. I can't believe it. I don't know. I have like very little confidence in Kenyon Green being good. Like, see, for me, I'm an A&M fan. I watch A&M. I'm watching Kenny Green, and he never was like a guy that I'm like, man, this guy, like, he just never was a guy that stood out to me when I'm watching the game. Like, granted, at this time, I really was not like into watching film, but I'm watching A&M, and I'm like, Kenny's not really doing much. Like, it's not a bad thing for a lineman, but I'm not watching the run game and be like, he's just mauling guys. He never did that, and he was a top 15 pick.
He was really like supposed to be like 25 to 40 range, and then they picked it, and people were excited because he's a local guy, and you don't want to be negative about a cool situation like that, but we saw it with the Chiefs too. They took Kansas State, Felix Sanudike-Uzoma, and now
yeah, that was funny. Yeah, they were hosting the draft.
Yeah,
they took the local guy. That was
never do that stuff. It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
And he's like, I think when Kansas City does it, you don't really bat an eye.
Man, I like this tape. I like the Felix's tape, but maybe not as a first rounder. But
I think he actually did.
Kenny was just a guy that Zion Johnson was a guy that I think most people had higher. Tyler Lindenbaum was a guy that, for the Texans in that situation, they needed center more than they needed guard. Like, they had no future center, and Tyler Lindenbaum was like a guy that I felt like was a safe pick. He would have made a ton of sense. And then you could have just taken Kyle Hamilton, which still to this day pisses me off, the fact that we could have just taken Kyle Hamilton. We didn't. But, it sucks. But Casario's been very good. I think people kind of dog on Casario because of that pick. But outside of that, Casario's been a very good GM for this team. It's hard to get too upset about that when he's been very, very good.
I mean, it's very clear what he tried this year, and I don't blame him for it, but we'll see if he adjusts from here.
Yeah, and I think me and Drew kind of talked about this when I think the whole fan base was like, we're winning the Super Bowl this season. This season, to me, obviously be awesome if everything worked out, but this season was also just a straight up like we did not have enough assets to address every part of the team in this last offseason, because we were in a situation coming into 2023 where we thought we were rebuilding, and then you had a really quick turnaround, and you had a very tough schedule coming into this season. So it was like, we're going to try to upgrade it the best we can, and we're going to see what works. And you saw what worked. The defensive line, the upgrades were awesome. The defensive line was incredible. Azeez was very good, except for the Kansas City game. He was pretty brutal in that game. But Azeez was very good this season as a player. He impressed me a lot. They extended a guy like Jimmy Ward, which I know is not popular in the fan base, but Jimmy Ward was a productive player this year. He played very well.
Jacob.
He was okay. I don't like Toto very much, but he was okay. He was okay, I guess, for the team.
He was a great run stopper, and I think that needs to be highlighted too.
Henry Toto was a good pick, fifth rounder. You got a very good pick if you want to go with that, but not really high on him as a player, but good pick. And Christian Harris was a guy that just was not. I don't think he's a starter. But
any
guy him as a player, like, but a good pick, like that doesn't. Those don't correlate. Like,
no, okay. I think he's a very good depth linebacker. He's not a starter, but that's not what you're looking for in the fifth round. So I think that's a successful pick.
And second down linebacker.
Yeah. And, Christian Harris is a guy that did not play a lot of this year. And when he played, even late in the season, there was he was playing special teams. So there was just a little bit that was weird about that whole situation. I don't know if he was 100% healthy or what the situation was, but he's the guy that I still like as a player, and I think can come back next season, be big for this team. And they had a ton of injuries, on multiple missing Jalen Petrie and Jimmy Ward in the playoffs sucked. Like, having both your nickels and a nickel-heavy defense was not fun. Obviously the receiver injuries sucked. But, it still was a successful season, in my opinion, because you figured out what your issues were. You got Slowick out of here. You brought in a new coordinator now. You have to upgrade the offensive line and receiver. But, there's a lot of receiver options out there. You want to talk about kind of the top end free agency. You got, obviously, T. Higgins. He's not coming to Houston, though. But you got guys like Cooper Kupp, who's an option we talked about. Stephon Diggs, you could always bring back. I don't think he's going to be brought back with the Rams offense, more than likely. He doesn't really fit it. You got to block, and I don't think he's going to want to block. So he'll probably go somewhere else. He'd probably go somewhere else.
I don't know. I don't know if I'd want Diggs in here with the type of culture change
I don't think
going on.
Happen. Love Diggs as a player, though. I thought at the time it was a great move, and I think he still is a productive player. I hope wherever he goes, he does well because I thought he was awesome this season. I loved, what he did. Like, and he was awesome because he came in with these chemistry issues, and he was awesome, man. He was great. I wish he would have been healthy for the season, but and then you get those are kind of the top two guys who you're kind of targeting, and then you go into the middle range where you got guys like Darius Slayton, who I like a lot. Demarcus Robinson's a very realistic target. With Nick Caley coming over. Tutu Atwell is a realistic target as a Rams guy. I don't like him as much as Demarcus Robinson, but another guy that Caley has connections with. Demarcus Robinson would make a ton of sense as like a depth receiver because I have issues with the Texans' depth at receiver. I do not like Xavier Hutchinson as a player. Mechie's okay, but they have depth issues. Robert Woods, maybe he's brought back now. I mean, Rams offense, maybe he's brought back for another 1 year deal, which I would be cool with. Robert Woods is actually pretty productive this season.
Yeah, he should be back on the team. And obviously, I didn't think he should have made the team the year prior over Noah Brown. But this year it makes sense, absolutely. For this upcoming season, it would make sense.
Noah Brown would be nice, man.
Yeah.
I know. I was going to say that. I go to that every time. People hate me for it too because every time.
I would be annoyed about stuff like that too. No, that
just frustrates
bummer.
the hell out of me because it was so obvious at the time. It more so frustrates me because when it happened, the fan base tried to act like it wasn't stupid, and it was stupid. And they were like, "He's been hurt all of training camp." I'm like, "We watched him all of last season in the same offense. Like, why are we acting like we don't know who he is? It's not like a guy that you didn't know." So. Yeah, that was frustrating. Noah Brown was really good for the Texans in 2023. He was awesome.
He was really good, man. That was a fun breakout that I wish they had.
It was. I remember
dogging
on him because he's dropping passes. Like he did his classic Cowboys drops, and then he just was awesome in the regular season. It was really fun. But no, there's certain depth guys that Caley's going to try to find his offensive fits. I think this probably increases the likelihood that Titus Howard is the right guard next year because the pass protection and he's a better gap fit, I think, than he is a zone fit when it comes to the run game. Juice Scruggs is probably not a center in this scheme either, which I like him as a center, in his zone scheme, but they're probably going to try to run more gap, and Juice Scruggs is not really a fit in that. But maybe he's a guard, I think he was a productive player at right guard at the end of the season. So it's an interesting talk. Jarrett Patterson's a good fit in a gap scheme. He's much better at this type of stuff than he is at zone. So maybe he kind of slots in his center. I don't know. I guess we'll see what happens. But this is a very good line free agency and draft. I think you can definitely address that throughout this offseason.
It's in Trench's off season, help in the run game, stuff like that. I mean, that's it. I've looked at so far what I've looked into with free agency in the draft, like the opportunities. That's a good need to have. It's a good need to have this year.
And the Texans, Texans could also add defensive tackle. I know the defensive tackle room was really good this year, but there's a couple guys that are free agents. And, Folu probably is going to get paid more than people think because he was pretty productive this season. Mario Edwards may get paid too. All the defensive tackles were.
I think Mario Edwards should get paid probably close to $10 million.
But, me and Drew talked about this. I think it got cut out of the last episode because we were talking about offensive coordinator candidates. And then they picked one before we got the video uploaded. So we had to cut it out, unfortunately. But we did talk about how Sheldon Rankins is a possible cut candidate. And he was pretty good for the Texans in 2023. So he's a guy that the Texans could absolutely bring back.
He was. He was also a part of the problem in terms of stopping the run. And so, that's
he
fine.
was more of a pass rusher.
That's
for
fine. I think D'Amico can understand that and just kind of use him on third down. I think this year in the draft, they should probably look for maybe finally they'll splurge on kind of a pure run stopper. And I know they kind of have Kurt Hinish there, Folu, but Folu could get paid. But I think this would probably be the year to address that a little bit more.
Absolutely. Speaking of that, do y'all want to go ahead and oh yeah, Nico, you're all good. You're all good. We appreciate you for coming on, of course.
Yeah, no, it's fun. I'm down to talk more throughout the off season if you guys are interested in that. I mean, I'll be keeping up big time because,
of course,
I love following the Texans. So yeah, no, I appreciate it. It was a good talk. Hope Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, we appreciate you for coming on, of course. Drew, do you want to we can go ahead and do you want to just end it here? I think this is actually a pretty good spot. We've talked for a while. All right. Well, we appreciate y'all for coming on. Of course, thank you, Nico, for joining us.
Of course.
Yes, thank
we
you.
had I think we're super excited about the Nick Caley hire. I think there's a lot to like about this hire. Texans, making a lot of moves in free agency. I think the scheme is, the scheme change and other things. They're going to have to make these offensive moves. We talk about offensive line and receiver. But a lot to be excited about, moving forward. I think if Sloak would have stayed, there would have not been as much excitement, but, at least there's something to look forward to now. We appreciate y'all for tuning in as always, and we will see y'all next time.